Welcome to Meteorology Matters. If you've ever wondered how changes in weather data, climate research, actually hit home, how they affect your life, well, you've tuned into the right conversation.
Absolutely.
Today, we're looking closely at some recent shifts, things happening in the federal government concerning climate science and how we track severe weather.
Yeah, and these changes could have some pretty surprising consequences, really, for every single American.
Exactly. We're going to dig into what's happening with scientists involved in the National Climate Assessment.
Right, hundreds of them basically told their work wasn't needed anymore. And we'll also talk about NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, ending its database, the one tracking those billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. It's been around a long time.
Yeah, that database was pretty significant. Now, these might sound like, bureaucratic tweaks, technical stuff happening behind the scenes, but we really want to unpack what they could mean for you, how you understand the risks around you, how prepared you can be for severe weather.
And ultimately, yeah, the impact on your wallet. That's a big part of it.
So where should we start? Let's maybe begin with those scientists, the ones no longer on the National Climate Assessment.
Okay. Well, the number itself is striking. It's nearly 400 scientists. These were people actively working on the assessment when they were told, essentially, their expertise wasn't required.
And this assessment, it's not just some report, right? It's mandated by Congress.
That's correct. Every 4 years, it summarizes climate change impacts right here in the U.S. And it's used by, well, a whole range of people. Federal agencies making policy, local governments planning.
Even businesses.
Oh, definitely. Businesses use it to assess future risks. It's foundational.
So it really lays the groundwork for understanding what's happening. Sea level rise, changes for farmers, the intensity of storms.
Exactly. It touches on all of that. It helps understand threats to lives, property, the economy.
And now the people putting that together are being, well, dismissed.
And it's telling that major scientific groups, like the American Geophysical Union and the American Meteorological Society, they've stepped up, they've announced they'll publish work from these scientists themselves in a special collection.
That sounds like a big signal, like there's a real concern in the scientific community.
It strongly suggests worries about whether the official report will be as comprehensive, as detailed as it needs to be.
Right. The administration says, okay, they're legally required to produce the assessment,
Yes, they have to.
but they're also reevaluating its scope, what it covers.
That seems to be the plan, yes.
Yeah.
Evaluating the scope.
So think about that. If the scope gets narrowed, if the knowledge from those nearly 400 experts isn't fully included, what does that mean for the report you see? The one policymakers use? Will it be the full picture?
And that hits directly on planning for the future. It's critical. How can governments, federal, state, local, how can they prepare effectively for climate impacts without the most thorough assessment possible?
Yeah, things like building infrastructure, public health planning.
Precisely. Planning for heat waves, disease vectors, emergency response protocols. It all relies on good projections of future risk.
And if those projections become, fuzzier, less detailed?
It just makes it much harder to make sound decisions, adaptation efforts, mitigation efforts. They could really be hampered.
It's like trying to navigate in fog without all your instruments, maybe?
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're less sure of what's ahead.
Okay, so that's the assessment side. Let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the money. The end of NOAA's billion-dollar disasters database. This sounds potentially huge, too.
It really is another significant change for public understanding. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, kept this database going since 1980, 40-plus years.
Wow.
Meticulously tracking the financial costs. Only events causing over $1 billion in damage.
So the really big ones, hurricanes, droughts, major floods, hailstorms.
Exactly. The kind of events that can devastate communities, cripple regional economies.
And this data, it wasn't just for scientists, was it?
No, not at all. It was a vital resource for the public, for journalists covering these disasters, anyone wanting to grasp the actual financial toll. It put a hard, a dollar figure on the cost to the country.
Right. It made it tangible.
And NOAA themselves said, look, the database wasn't designed to pinpoint climate change as the sole cause for each event. They acknowledged other factors matter, like more people living in risky areas, more expensive stuff getting damaged.
Sure, development patterns play a role.
Absolutely. But the data did clearly show a trend, an undeniable upward trend in losses over time.
And that trend aligns with what climate science tells us about certain extreme weather events becoming more frequent or more intense.
It certainly does. Many studies link rising temperatures to increases in the severity or frequency of heat waves, heavy rainfall, some types of storms, factors that drive up disaster costs.
So even without saying climate change caused X, the database showed the financial bleeding from the types of events climate change makes worse?
That's a fair way to put it. It provided compelling evidence of that growing financial strain.
And now, it's stopping. Why?
Well, NOAA mentioned things like staffing cuts, also increased scrutiny on climate-related programs. The existing data up through 2024 will be archived. You can still access the history, but no new updates after this year. That makes tracking future trends consistently much, much harder.
Okay, this feels like where it really connects to American families.
I think so.
Because this database wasn't just government numbers, right? It pulled info from the insurance industry, other sources.
Exactly. It was a unique compilation, public and private data synthesized.
And experts like Jeremy Porter from the First Street Foundation, they're saying this will be incredibly hard, maybe impossible for others to replicate properly.
Yes. He specifically mentioned analyzing damage trends regionally. That becomes very difficult without this established, consistent federal resource. It provided a baseline.
So let's spell it out. What are the consequences for taxpayers?
For homeowners, well, think about understanding risk. Without this clear public data tracking the costs, how well can you really know the financial danger of living in a certain area prone to floods or wildfires or hurricanes?
It becomes harder to gauge.
Much harder. And that could definitely affect insurance. Premiums might go up significantly.
Or could people lose access to insurance altogether in some places?
That is a real concern, yes. Insurance availability could shrink in high-risk zones if the risk isn't transparently quantified and tracked over time.
That's quite unsettling. If you can't easily find the data on rising costs, how do you assess your personal risk?
Right. And how do insurance companies set fair rates based on predictable trends?
And maybe bigger picture, how does the public hold officials accountable for managing these risks if the scoreboard showing the financial damage keeps getting hidden or just stops updating?
It removes a key piece of public accountability, arguably, a clear measure of the growing burden.
It feels like losing a crucial warning light on the dashboard.
Precisely. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. It coincides with broader staff reductions reported at NOAA, at the National Weather Service.
Which could affect other things too. Forecasts? Warnings?
Potentially, yes. Those services rely on adequate staffing and resources. Plus, looking ahead, the White House has proposed some pretty deep budget cuts for NOAA for 2026.
Oh, like what?
Proposals included potentially eliminating NOAA's entire research division,
Yeah.
closing weather and climate labs. That would obviously further reduce the data available.
Wow. Okay, so fewer scientists working on the big picture climate assessment and stopping the main tool tracking the dollar cost of extreme weather hitting us now.
That's the combination.
And meanwhile, big reinsurance companies like Swiss Re, they're reporting global insured losses from disasters are rising.
Yes, the financial impact globally is climbing. The data is clear on that front from the insurance world.
So the problem isn't going away. It seems like our ability to officially track and analyze its impact here in the U.S. is potentially shrinking.
Well, when you connect those two dots, the scientists and the database, it does suggest, potentially, a move towards downplaying the impacts, downplaying climate change effects, and the very real rising costs of extreme weather.
How so?
Well, if you reduce the scientific power focused on understanding the problem comprehensively, and you simultaneously stop tracking a key metric of its financial damage, it just makes it harder for everyone, for you listening at home, for policymakers. Harder to fully grasp the scale and urgency.
And that lack of data, lack of analysis, it ripples out, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It hinders informed decisions at every single level.
Individuals might not get the full picture of risk in their town. Local governments might struggle to plan adequately for what's coming.
And higher levels of government might feel less pressure, perhaps, to enact policies needed to mitigate risks or help communities adapt if the problem isn't being clearly and consistently documented.
So a weaker understanding leads to weaker preparation.
Almost inevitably. And we know what inadequate preparation means. It usually means greater financial costs down the road for homeowners, for taxpayers' footing recovery bills.
And tragically, greater human costs, too.
Yes. And without that easy access to data on the rising costs, the burden on communities, on taxpayers, it becomes less visible, less transparent, which you could argue makes it harder to have an informed public conversation about solutions.
So for you listening, what does this boil down to? It means the information you rely on to understand climate shifts in your area, the real risks from extreme weather, that information might become less complete, maybe less reliable, harder to find.
Hmm.
And that could make it tougher for you to make big life decisions, where to live, how to protect your home, what kind of future to plan for. These changes we've discussed today on Meteorology Matters, scaling back climate research, stopping the disaster cost database, they're pretty significant shifts.
They really are. Shifts in how the nation monitors, understands, and ultimately responds to a changing climate and its impacts.
And these developments could genuinely create bigger challenges for people, for communities, for businesses, trying to prepare for those increasing risks and costs.
Yeah, that absence of comprehensive, public data, readily available science, it can have really far-reaching consequences for all of us in American society.
We definitely encourage you to stay informed. Think critically about this. How might these changes affect your future, your community's future? And you can keep exploring these topics by following meteorologist Rob Jones. That's me on Instagram at meteorologist.
Good plug.
And on TikTok at TV Meteorologist. And check out the Rob Jones Hurricane YouTube channel. You'll find the Meteorology Matters podcast playlist there too. So maybe the final thought for you today is, what questions do these developments raise for you personally?
Yeah, and what more information would you want to seek out now?